Welcome back, guys. Hope you're doing great. It's Vitri here. In the series of the React videos, today in this video, we're gonna learn how to build a custom form system completely from the scratch. We're not going to use any kind of third-party libraries like React Hook Forms or Formic and the validators like the Zord resolvers and Yep resolvers. We are not going to anything. We are going to build completely our own form system with the validators completely from the scratch. And along with that, we are going to do some testings as well as whether that those components are ready to work in the production level as well as. So we're gonna learn the testing as well as in this section. All right. So in until in this series, so we discussed so far the lots of hooks and the advanced implementations of the hooks and everything. So if you haven't watched those playlists completely, please click the top right corner so you can watch those complete playlists and all those videos in that playlist. Then you can start watching this. All right. So without wasting your time further ado, let's get started. Okay, so in a real world React applications, forms are everywhere, right? So building a custom form system from a scratch by having a custom hook, and most importantly, we are going to test it personally personally and moreover professionally as well as using the React testing libraries. Okay, we are not going to use any third-party libraries, as I said previously. We are not going to use Formic, or we are not going to use the React form hook. This is the pure React JavaScript, and this is how you truly understand the forms in the React. Okay, so basically what we are going to do is we are going to build a reusable a custom hook called useForm, which comes with validation logics, error handling, submit handler, and finally we are going to write the test for the entire forms as well as. So our goal is to write a predictable, testable, and a clean code, right? Okay, so let's write the code for that. First what we need to do is just a minute. Yep. So over here, this is the folder structure which we are following for the in the entire playlist over here. So we have the hooks, all the hooks which we discussed so far in this series. Okay. Inside this hooks, I'm gonna create myself a new file called useForm.js. So this is the place where we are going to write our all the like what's the entire logics of our form. Then in I'm gonna create one more folder over here called utils. Inside this utils, I'm going to create myself a new folder called validators.js. Validators.js. So let's write some validations. Okay. So there are a list of validations you can keep on add. That's up to you. But in this case, we are going to discuss the most common thing like the required one and the minimum length. Okay. And the email patterns, all these things. Okay, so in this case I'm just going to say export const is equals to required, which equals to an arrow function, and this function is basically going to take the value in it. And let me enable the word wrap so we can see it. Okay, value. And basically if I do have the value, then I don't have to display any error message, leave it empty. If I don't have the value, I'm just going to say this field is required, something like that. That's the required function. Then we are going to create an export const minimum length function, which equals to going to take the length, and it's going to have a value in it. Along with this, we are going to have one more function, so which is going to be value dot length. If the value dot length is greater than the length which we are receiving in it, okay, should be greater than or equals to of the length. In that case, we're going to create and keep it as an empty string. Otherwise, we are just going to simply bring the dynamic string literals. I'm just going to say minimum at supply that length value characters. Okay, this is how the minimum length function is being calculated. Then export const email, which we are going to use the email regular expressions, we're gonna get the value. Okay, and we are going to make sure that value matches a certain email pattern regular expressions over here. Okay, this is the pattern that we are going to use. So we can accept the strings, and it should be follow the pattern of at, and you can use the dot. And even if you're, make sure, let's get into the, like, what to say, um email a regular expression, search for that. That is going to give you the regular expressions. Okay, this is the complete regular expressions that you can use for a professional email validations. Let's use that itself. Okay, which is basically A to Z, whatever the character you can use, even uppercase, lowercase, and 0 to 9, whatever the numbers that you can use. Even you can use special characters like dot, underscore, and these kinds of symbols are allowed. And after the at sign, you can use the same kind of pattern. Okay, and after the dot sign, you can use the same kind of characters for the domain name, but it should carry on minimum two characters after the for the domain name. Okay, then I can use the test in order to validate that. I can test that value. If it is say so, if it is validated, if it is true, then leave it as an empty. Otherwise, I'm gonna bring it as invalid email address. Okay, likewise, you can keep on add the countless times of the n number of validators over here. Okay, so these validations rules are just functions. They takes the values and return either an empty string if it is valid, or it's going to return an error message which is invalid, something like that, right? These functions are completely reusable, testable, and we are not using any kind of React dependencies for doing these kinds of stuff. Completely plain React JavaScript code. So this makes the validation logics easy to extend and for any further maintenance for these kinds of validators. Okay, so now let's jump into the use form. So this is the place where we are going to write the main logics over here. So let's bring the use form over here from the React. Okay, from the React, what we are going to do is, so basically this use form, okay, like what it's going to accept the form values and validation errors and change handlings and submit handlings, right? So the handle change, it's a function that updates the input names, stuffs, and everything, and validate and runs all the rules for each and every field which you are going to use in that form, right? So first validations, it's basically error stops for further checks, right? That's what we do. If you find it, you should stop it for the further any kind of stuff. Then we're going to have a function called handle submit to prevent the default and submit only the value if it is valid. So these all logics kept outside from the JSX, which is exactly what we want. That's what we are going to do inside the use form. Okay, so inside the use form, let's bring this use state. Okay, then export const use form is equals to open an arrow function, open it. This is going to get certain parameters, which is going to be initial values. That's the form initial values, then the validations, then on submit. Okay, these are the stuff. Then inside this function, what I'm going to do, use state snippet. Let's bring the values state values, set values. By default, it is going to carry on the initial values in it. Then we are going to bring the use state snippet one more time, which is going to carry on the errors, and that is going to say set errors, which is an empty object itself. Okay, now I'm going to have a handle change function as I said previously. Okay, so let's go here, const handle change, which equals to an arrow function which accepts the event. Open it. So every time whenever there is an event is being changing, I need to gather their name and the value from from the event dot target to collect the name and its value of that, because we need to figure it out on which value we are updating the terms, the strings, right? So that's why we need these two things. Okay, then set values, we need to update the values. So whatever the previous values I do have in that array, that object, I just need to get that completely, and I need to return it a new object as a value. So bring the all the previous properties as it is, then just update the current name prop in it, which is going to be the value. For instance, let's say if the user types the values in the first name, so the input field name is going to be first name, something like this, and he will type the first name, like let me type my name. So if I want to update, so think about it, in the same values you might have the first name, last name, email address, and a lot of stuff. So if I want to update the first name, I need to bring all those rest of the values like last name and email. Then I need to target the first name over here with this prop. Then I will update the new value over there. So that's the reason we are writing something like this. Okay. Then once you have those values and everything, I need to validate. I need to have one more function called validate, which is equals to an arrow function itself. Open it, then const new error, which is going to be an object. So for const field in validations. Okay, so validations, fields in validations. Then I'm going to extract the for const rule of validations of the field, specific field. Open it, then I'm going to extract the error. Don't worry, I will explain why we are writing that line and everything. Then we are going to use this rule function. Open it, then I'm going to supply the values of that field into it to figure out whether there is an error or not. If I do have that error by matching that specific field, then I just need to add the new errors of that specific field. Whatever the field it is, I need to add that error, whatever the error it may be. Okay, if it is, then I need to break it completely, because I need to come outside of that stuff, right? So right after these three expansion, 1 2 3, and for this for loop, once you finish that for loop, I need to set errors with the new errors objects. Okay, then at the end I just need to return the object dot keys of that new errors, then dot length, which is equals to 0. So don't worry, let me explain this code completely to you, so that helps you to understand why we are writing all these stuffs. So basically this validate function is the heart of our form system. So breaking it down, like understanding it, why exactly and what exactly all these things will do, that really important for us. Okay, so try to understand over here. So first you need to understand what exactly this function is doing. So that's the really big picture over here. So this function validates all the fields and collects the validation errors and stores them inside the state, so which is going to be this new errors. Okay, so it returns true if the form is valid, it returns false if the form having any, if that those fields having any errors in it. It does not submit the form, it only checks the correctness. Okay, it's not going to submit the form value over here. Okay, so to store the multiple errors, only we are creating this new errors function. We need to collect all the validation errors, so each key will be the field name. So the field name, it's going to be the key over here, and based on that field name we are going to get the key, and for that key we are supplying the value. So each value will be your error message. Okay, for instance, let's say, as I said, for first name, if the field is not there, then this is a required field. That error message will be stored for the first name key, so we can print it based on the key values, based on the field value itself. So we don't mutate existing errors, we build a fresh object. This is an important. Okay, so this is the most important React state update for the error validations. So let's jump into the loop over here. So like um, basically what the validation fields should looks like, right? So because let's talk about it. This is the object it's going to be. So we're gonna have the name field. We need the name, that needs to be a required field, right? It needs to be a required one. just like the email. So email is also needs to be a required one, and it's a type of email itself, because we need to match the patterns as well as. Okay, think about it. We are going to have a password, so password needs to have a minimum length as well as. So minimum length. So this is how basically we are going to write those field validation setups, right? So in the first loop, okay, in the first loop, what field that's based on the field, what field that you're trying to access. So in the first loop, we are accessing the key, which is the name, right? And in the second loop, we are trying to access the field for that specific field name. For that specific field name, what kind of validation that we are trying to access over there. Okay, so that is what we are trying to do over here. Okay, based on the field, we are going to trigger those functions. Okay, based on the field, we are going to rule it. That's what we are doing over here. Okay, so if you target the email field, let's say on the second loop, the email field will be accessed over here. Then for the email field, we have one more array in it, which is having two different values, required and the email, right? So basically this loop will runs the required function, and this particular loop will runs the required function and the email function which we created inside the validator. So each rule is just a function. That's it. Okay, so how we are validating those rules, that's the real tricky part. That's why we are using this rule function. Okay, so rule is the validation function. Okay, so that gives that's the function which helps you to this trigger these functions. We are basically supplying the reference for this, and we are getting the value, whatever the value that is being returned, and we are evaluating over here. Okay, so and then at the second point over here, we are checking a condition, right? We are checking a condition, basically if error. So if it does contains an error, if it is having an empty string, which means it is not going to do something over there. But if it have an error message instead of an empty string, which means true, then it is going to add that error in your new error object. Okay, so yeah, this is it. But you need to understand the main purpose of this rule function, why we need to have this rule function stuff and everything. If you don't have this rule, so basically if you just open it, bring any, yep. Okay, so simply to keep it in mind, rule is an inbuilt function that helps you to validate a reference function which you are trying to supply in it. Okay, so yeah, this is it. This is what this validation functions which we are written, and this is how we are validating the complete data stuff which we do have in our hand. Okay, then at the end, what we have to do right after this function, we have to create one more function which is going to be const handle submit, which is equals to, and we are going to collect the event, and inside here I'm just going to say event dot prevent default. We don't want to refresh the page, right? So that's why. Then if not validate, if it is calling this function is equals to written. Okay, if there isn't any validation issues, so see why we are this is the condition that's most important, right? It's going to return the value if the length is equals to 0. It is going to return the value as 0. So if you have in the new error object that, let's say, first name, email address, required field, if any one of the field throws an error, which means the new error state object is not going to be an empty object. It is going to have some value in it, which means we are not supposed to allow the user to submit the value, right? That is what we are checking over here. It's going to return a boolean value, true or false, right? So if the new errors dot length, if it is equals to 0, which means it's validated, so it's completely fine. If it is not, it carries some value in it, then it should not be submitted. So that's why we are using not, right? If it is true, then we have to submit the value, which means the new error object is completely empty. Okay, so that's why we are using the exactly the opposite value. If it is returning true, which means the new error object is carries some value in it, so we are not supposed to push it. Only if the values it's returned over here, if it is false, then only we are supposed to push it, which means the new error object is completely empty, so you can go ahead. So that's why we are checking the negative value over here. If it is written false, which means we need to do the reverse action. Okay, very simple. New errors object that needs to be an empty. When it needs, if it is, when it will be an empty value, if it doesn't carries an empty value, it will be fine, right? If it is carries an any error messages in it, which means we are not supposed to do it, right? So that's what we are doing the negative actions over here. All right, so this might feel confusing, but if you try to understand what I'm saying, maybe if my English is too bad, really sorry for that. So but anyways, I try to explain as much as possible, so try to understand. Even if you don't understand the thing what I'm saying, you can pin this in the comment section. I'm happy to explain in a better way. Okay, so right after this, if this conditions, if there is no errors, then I just need to submit the form. On submit with the values whatever I do have in my hand, values. Okay, and by the end, this use form that needs to return the values, the errors, and the handle change function and the handle submit function, all these things that needs to be returned from the use form. Right, so let's go ahead and create a new component like input field, like text area, text field, and all those stuff. In this case, we are just going to create an input field called input alone. So form, inside the form I'm gonna create a new file called input.jsx, and here I'm just going to say RAFCE, which is going to be input. Okay, input. So basically this input is going to carry on a different sets of props, which is going to be the label, then it's going to have the name, value, on change, errors, and the type, whatever the type it's going to be. By default it's going to be the text type. These are all the input props. Then what is going to return, basically it's going to return a class name called flex column, and gap it's going to be 1. So let me bring that over here. So I'm just going to say width, of course it's going to be screen, height which is going to be screen, flex, item center, justify center. So everything is over here. Then I'm just going to bring the input. I can able to see the input. Now inside the input over here, instead of this text input, I'm gonna render those the use form hook validation stuffs and all those things over here. So I'm just going to say input, which is basically going to be the type of type prop. Then oof, 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 name, which is going to be the field name as name prop, which we do have over here in order to access those field names. Then value, which is going to be value itself. Then on change, whenever there is a changes it's been going to happen, I just need to use the same on change function of reference which we do have in our hand. Then class name, okay, comma is not necessary. Class name, which is going to be, it's going to have a border padding, it's going to be 2, and rounded it's going to be medium. That's how it looks. Okay, then the border color it's going to be border gray, 100, or it can be 200. Okay, then we have to bring a label, right? So let's bring the label. So basically the label is going to be the field name itself, what name it is. Okay, so far it's not showing anything. The reason is because we haven't supplied the field name properly, right? So the props, whatever the props that we supplied, it's completely empty. Don't worry, it makes sense once we finished it completely. Then if there is any errors, we have to display the errors as well as, so paragraph, and then here I just have to display, like let's say this is the error, this is the error that I want to display. So what we can do is I can simply say class name, margin left, auto width as full. Okay. uh, Otherwise we can keep this here. Class name width, of course it's going to be full. Flex item center, come on, item center, justify everything in the, then I can put something right over here. That's how. And this is going to be text excess extremely small. Text needs to be in the red color 500 and font semi bold, so I should be able to see that error over there. Okay, this needs to be rendered. When it needs to be rendered, only if I do have the error, then only I need to render this. Otherwise I'm not supposed to render it. Okay, now our input component is ready. So let's get back to our form example. This is the place where we are going to set up our form. So here I'm going to get my form over here. Const form is equals to use form. Bring it from dot slash use form hook. So make sure that is being coming from your hooks folder. Open it. This form is basically going to receives these three different parameters over here. Okay, so it's going to it as an object, and here I'm going to supply the initial values, which is going to be the name, then email, then of course it is going to have the password as well as, okay, these are the initial values. Then I'm going to supply the validations. So validations, for the validations I'm going to supply the name field with an array of required function. So please make sure that required function, it's coming from your utils validators. Please make sure it's coming from where? Validators. So this is the array reference that we are supplying. Then I need to supply for email field array. It also needs to be required. Then it is the email field. Make sure it's been imported properly inside your validators. Then for the password, which is going to be the required. Then of course it is also needs to have the minimum length of what, 8 characters of the minimum length. Okay, these are the validations that needs to be. Then at last one more, which is going to be on submit. This function, it's going to return values, so you need to supply the values as a parameter in it. Then I'm just going to simply say console.log, open it, submit it with the values, whatever the values that I've sent, that's how it needs to be. Then yep, that's it, that's pretty much done. And here these fields are needs to be wrapped inside the HTML form. So let's bring the form, let's remove the actions over here, and I'm just going to say class name. Basically width is going to be 3/4 width, 3/4 of the width, and it needs to have a border, and border gray, it needs to be 200, rounded it needs to be medium, padding needs to be 4, flex column item needs to be gap 4, and inside let's bring that input tag and view word wrap. So you should be able to see two different, basically this is the input tag which we do have. For this input I need to supply certain values, right? First I need to supply the name, which is going to be the name prop. That's the name prop. Why I can't see the label? Oops, this is supposed to be label. Yep, now I should be able to see. For this label I can simply say class name text muted or text neutral 700 color, something like that. Okay, then now we supplied at the label. Then I need to supply the name, which is basically the name itself. Make sure these name and this name are matching properly. Then I need to supply the value. Basically value is based on the form value, form dot values dot name. That's the name. Okay, let me enable the word wrap. Okay, so right after here I need to supply the on change, as well as for on change I need to call the form dot handle change function. Then error, for error error, you need to supply the form dot errors dot name error. If there is any name error, display it, save it. Okay, then just like the same way, I need to bring for email and the password. So by default, the we haven't supplied the type, right? Because type has a default value, so we don't have to worry about it. Now let's apply the email, change it to email. So we have the email field, and the type of this, it's going to be, maybe we can keep it as a string itself, or you can change it to email type itself, but in this case let's leave it as string itself. Then here I can change this into password, and I can rename this into the password field, save it. And of course, if you're typing something over here, it will be visible, but I'm going to change the type into what? Password. Now you can't see anything over here. Okay. And of course, we need a button to submit the button, right? So button, which is the type of submit button, make sure it's a submit button, then only the form will get submitted. So for this, I'm just going to say class name, px it's going to be 4, and py it's going to be 2, rounded medium, bg gray, 500 or 6500, and text semi bold, sorry, not text semi bold, font semi bold, save it. This is how it looks, and this needs to be wrapped something like this. Class name, width of course needs to be full, flex, item center, justify, everything needs to be in the end. Justify, everything needs to be in the end. That's how it looks. And since let's keep this as the grade 200 or 300, something like this. Okay, I think that's pretty much good enough. Then let's bring the cursor pointer. Now if you try to submit this form, see what's happening. Nothing's happening. Why? Actually it should trigger the error. Let me try. Let's type something. Nothing is happening. Mm. Why is that happening? Form is being submitted. Oh my goodness. So when the form is being submitted, we need to call the handle submit, right? So on submit, we need to call the form dot handle submit. Save it. Now, if I click this, we are getting the messages error. Why? Oops. Here we need to print the error. There we go. So it's simply saying this field is required. So if I'm supplying like with trivial something, and if I'm simply supplying this sample at, and here it's simply saying invalid email address. So let's say sample at gmail.com. Okay. All right. I think that is a lag over here. So what is that lag is because every time whenever only if I submit it, it is keep on checking the validations, right? So that's the bit issue over here. We need to check the validations, right? Every time whenever the user enters the value, right? So in order to fix that, what we have to do is, so basically inside the handle change, we are not checking anything, but we have the validate functions in order to validate those issues. And so every time whenever there is a changes over here we have to directly check that. So what I'm going to do is const field rules is equals to validations of name, create that. Then I'm gonna check the for loop for const rule of the field rules. Okay, so of the field rules, if it is required, or the minimum length, whatever the number of rules that is being inside that array, we need to check that. So const error is equals to rule of that value, whatever that function is, it needs to execute it. If I do have the error in it, I just need to say set errors, just exactly the same way. Okay, what we did for the set errors. Okay, let's write it one more time. Set errors, access the previous value. Okay, return it as an object. Inside the object, return the previous value as it is. And I'm gonna create a new, I'm gonna target that name prop. Then I'm gonna update that value with name prop with that error. Okay, if it is first name, update the first name error message. If it is last name, update the last name error message. Then once it has been set, I need to return it. Okay, so right after here, I'm gonna set the errors with the previous error, whatever the error it's been there, keep it, then return the object by returning the previous. Then okay, just like this will happens what only if there is an error. If it doesn't have an error, we need to keep that value as an empty string, because even after completely typing the email address in a valid form, it is not supposed to display that error message, right? So let's say sample, and if it is empty, it's saying this field is required because that's the validation that we wanted. And if I simply type sample at Gmail, still it's not a valid email. But after the dot, if I type two different values, see, it is not showing that error message, which means it's working as it's supposed to be. Then let me type my name, password, let's say sample at 123 with the minimum characters. Then now if I submit it, I should be able to see the complete data in our console.log, which means it's working and it's ready for production code. And without any extension, without any third-party libraries, we created ourselves a completely form system from the scratch with the custom validations, with the custom hook. We are handling it everything properly, and it's production ready and it's completely safe. Now the most important stuff, which is that I need to test this code. Okay, so for that, what I'm going to do is inside the components. So if you haven't watched the if you don't understand how the testing has been working, so you can check the link in the description. So go ahead and watch that the video in the playlist itself. Testing, we created a video for understanding the React testing by using white. So please go ahead and go ahead and watch that video for basic understanding for the V test. Okay, so inside the form, this is the form example. So please create this file inside the same folder itself. So here inside the components, I'm going to create a new form example dot test dot jsx. Okay, not, it needs to be exactly something like this, form example dot test dot jsx, something like that. Okay, hit the enter. Now here I have to bring those the stuff which is necessary for that. From where? From this package, from at testing, from at oh sorry, from not form, at testing library react. Okay, this package that you need to download. So please go ahead and watch that video, so that helps you to understand what are the stuffs that you need to do. Then I'm going to import this at testing library js dom, all these things. From this functions, I'm going to bring the render function, then I need the screen function, then I need the fire event function as well, all these things. Okay, then I'm going to import this form example component, because that's the component which we are trying to load. So I'm going to write the test. Okay, from the v test, I'm going to bring this test, open it. I'm going to give a name for this, for that testing, so which is going to be shows validation error on submit. That's the test name that we are trying to do. So here I need to render that component. What component is going to be rendered? Which is going to be the form example. Okay. Then right after here, I need to fire an event. Fire event. What event that I'm trying to do? Click event, which is going to trigger this from the screen. I'm going to get the text value, get by text value. What text that we are trying to do? Submit. Based on this particular text that we are trying to figure it out, that element, and we are trying to click, and we trigger the click event in that element. So please make sure the text matches exactly. Then expect what output that we are expecting in the screen get by text value itself. If I able to see this field is required, this error message, this field is required to be in the document, that needs to be in the document. That's the function that's going to make sure that this particular text is inside that screen, which means it's working perfectly. So the test which we return, it's executed successfully. Okay, this is the first test that we are trying to do. Then we are trying to validate the form data. That's the second test that we are trying to do. Test, open it, submits form with valid data. That's the second test that we are trying to do. Open it. Here we have to render that app, right? So form example, bring that component in it. Then I need to fire an event, which is going to be the click event itself. Oh, oops, not change event, because every time whenever the input is being typed, it needs to be changed. So screen, from the screen, if I try to able to get the label text, so by the label name, so get by label text. What is this function we are going to get by label text? Open it. What's the label? Which is going to be the name. Okay, for the name, what I'm trying to do is comma, open an object. I'm going to get the target from that label. I'm going to access the target. I'm going to access the value, and I'm going to set the value as John. Okay, so for the we are trying to identify this particular label. For that label, I'm gonna yeah, we are going to try to set the value as John. Okay, so if everything is fine by the time when you're submitting it, if the name field is being assigned the value as John, if everything is working fine, it should give the test as successfully passed, because that is what the string is expecting, right? So we have to do the same stuff for what? For the password and as well as the email field. Okay, so fire event. So this time this is going to be the email field, and this time this is going to be the password field. And here for the email, I'm just going to be sample@gmail.com, and here I'm just going to say sample@123. Then at the end, I just have to submit the event. So I'm going to call this fire event submit, because we need to submit the form, right, with the valid form data. Then at the end, we are trying to expect that this field is required. That should not be in the screen. If it is not in the screen, then which means the form is validated, something like that. So expect screen dot query by text. Open it. This field is required. It should not be in, not here, not dot to be in the document. Open it. I hope this should work. Okay, so let's try to run this test. Let's stop the server, clear it, npm run test, hit the enter. Okay, so one test file, we are getting two tests failed over here. Screen dot get by label text, we are getting an error message over here. We need to figure it out why is that. So the issue over here is because what exactly happening here is because we are trying to access it based on the label name, but there is no direct connection or relationship between the name and the input field. So in order to resolve this issue, what we can do is we can create an const input id, which equals to bring a dynamic string literals, let's say input, and bring the name along with this, something like that. For the label field, we have this html for which input field we are creating this. So let's supply the input id over here, and we can supply the id. So by this way, we have the relationship between the label, and we have the relationship between the label and the input. So now let me stop the test and let me run the test one more time. This time still we are getting an error, but a different error. It's saying screen dot get by text. Actually, so here what we need to do is this here. Previously I just made it like query by all text. It is supposed to be query by text only, because we are not trying to check the every text. We are just trying to check whether this field dot is required in the screen only. So should be query by text. But currently right now we are getting the error on here, because if you submit this form, it's going to throw an error, because we are going to have a multiple times this error will be displayed. See, that's what the error message. See, this field is required, this field is required, this field is required, because once you submit the form, it is going to trigger that. So in order to fix this issue, because if you submit this form, what is happening, 3 times we are getting that error message. That is what it's saying over there. So in order to fix this, the very first test, because this is not necessary, because we are trying to figure it out whether the test is working or not. So if you don't want this test, you can ignore it, or you can simply change this into get by all text. um Get all by text. Yeah, it. I hope this should fix the issue. So um okay, so let me try to comment this and let me check this out. Yep, the issue is over there only. Actually, this is not necessary, because since we are getting multiple times the same text. This first test we returned it only for testing purpose, like whether the test is working or not. So this is the main stuff which we try to do. So we are supplying some valid data for that label. So basically how we are accessing those events over here by the label name. So how they are using, because if you check it out over here, the label and the input field doesn't have any direct relationship in the HTML element. So we created that relationship by using this HTML for attribute. This label is created for this input. So we have a common input id for this input and the label. So based on the id, it is being mapped. So by that, we are accessing this name, and we are setting the value for that input over here. Get by label text name, we are accessing the label, so we can access this input. For that input, we are accessing the target object in that input, and we are setting the value as John. So the John value will be set over there. So just like the same ways, we are setting the email and the password, and we are clicking the submit button. If everything is fine, which then how does it assumes it's everything is fine, because this field is required message will not be in your screen. By the way, we can make sure that is working, so the testing will get passed. Okay, cool. So this is it. This is all about this video. So if you have any questions, I hope we might have a lot of questions in this. So please don't hesitate to drop your questions in the comment sections. I'm happy to help you out. And if I explain anything in a wrong way, please let me know and pinpoint the timestamp what I said and what is wrong in that exact timeline. So I am happy to correct myself, and I'll give you the exact clear explanations. All right. So I'll see you in the next session with more interesting concept.